Thank you for watching. My name is Glenn Morgan, and this is We the Governed. Today's topic is going to be about protesting, and when it comes to protests, please leave your guillotines at home. We're back to Washington State, but the topic today is going to apply to you no matter where you live, and that is, when it comes to protests, please leave the guillotine at home. Now, the guillotine is a device that was popularized during the French Revolution, the Great Terror in France, and it was a device that was used to execute the king and the queen and many nobles and many other people in France in the late 1700s. And of course, towards the end, they were using it to chop each other's heads off, the revolutionaries. But it became a device that was very familiar with that, where they basically used this as a way to kill people. Unfortunately, despite the historic nature of that device, we are actually seeing it pop up and being mocked and repeatedly used now in protests today. The photo that you see here is from Portland, just from a few weeks ago, where they guillotined this poor bear, and it has become just an image that we're seeing more often, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this story and really talk about it. Here you see that they've brought, this was again just a few weeks ago, they brought the guillotine to Jeff Bezos' house, and they actually set it outside and wanted to, I don't know, implied some kind of a threat here. Now you see the video of them bringing the guillotine out with that poor bear stuck in it down in Portland, and they were playing their theme song to it, and of course they had to burn it. And as usual at these protests, you have to always throw a few different American flags on it and get it going. But the guillotine imagery now has started to just pop up a lot more than I've ever seen it before, and I really can't recall a time when it's been used like this so often. And so I wrote an article just a few days ago just about this guillotine practice routine that they seem to be doing, and I got a little bit of blowback on that article, but I think it really merits discussing this in a little bit more detail and why I believe that it would be wise to leave the guillotine at home. Now, protests are great. I've been involved in protests. I've helped organize them. I've attended a lot of them, both protests that I agree with and protests that I disagree with. This is a common way to interact with government when they are not listening to you, or when you believe they're not listening to you, to catch their attention and to draw attention to an issue that might otherwise be ignored. And so I'm a fan of protests. I think it's an important part of activism. Thank God we live in a country that, for the most part, still allows it. And I believe that they have to be peaceful. But if you're going to have a mostly peaceful protest, then there's certain things that you just don't need to bring to protests. For example, Molotov cocktails. A Molotov cocktail is, it sounds cool, it's kind of a, people have heard about it, but why would you want to bring that to a mostly peaceful protest? Unless the objective is to burn something down, create a structure fire, or do something else. Or even in some cases, you can burn your fellow protesters with it when you accidentally drop it on them or break it on them. It's not exactly a device that you need to bring to a mostly peaceful protest. Other things, you don't need high-powered lasers at a peaceful protest. Now, I realize that these have been popularized in the Hong Kong and Egyptian protests lately. Those are different countries and different situations than what we have in America, because mostly what they're being used for here seems to be to blind the police and possibly people you don't like, or people you disagree with while you're at the protest. That's hardly something that mostly peaceful protests would do. At a mostly peaceful protest, you really don't need hammers or sledgehammers. It's something very heavy and annoying to carry with you. You don't need to bring that to a protest. And sure, you can use it to break into a police station, or you can use it to break into a bank, but it's hardly the kind of device and accoutrement that you need to bring with you when you're going to a mostly peaceful protest. I wouldn't say there's much peacefulness related to that. You don't need to bring bottles of frozen water. Somebody has to take the time to freeze those bottles ahead of time. If you need water, you bring regular water bottles with you, and that's what you're going to drink. Protesting is a thirsty business. I understand why you'd want to have a bunch with you, but you don't bring a bunch of frozen ones with you that you hand out to the crowd so that they can, of course, conveniently throw them at the police or at other people that you don't like. This is not the example of what a peaceful protest would be like, and you're bringing things with you that are clearly not peaceful. And you also don't need guillotines. It's not a necessary accoutrement to have when you're there. Now, I realize after Trump got elected that the guillotine imagery in 2016, actually 2017 time, really started to take off. We started to see more of them being used in these protests around the street. You know, make the guillotine red again is kind of a playoff of Make America Great Again. But it's not the kind of thing that really implies peacefulness in any way at all. And yet it's become a very significant theme. You see Antifa carrying around imagery or references to guillotines. You see regular just protesters using guillotine imagery in different places. And again, you have, you know, threats, very specific personal threats here by posting guillotines outside of individuals' homes. That message that you're sending is not exactly a peaceful message. Even in Canada, the lefties have kind of gotten into it up there where they're using it for their political leaders and saying, you know, hey, may history repeat itself, chop, chop. And they're using, you know, put a guillotine outside of somebody's house. And of course, Donald Trump is the person who's usually featured in most of these guillotine activities. And you see him here outside of the White House where they were mocking up a guillotine execution. And this is just from a few weeks ago. And they even have a theme that they've played now at some of these events called The Guillotine by a group called The Coup, with a basic chorus saying, "We got the guillotine, you better run."
We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine, you better run. We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine, you better run. We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine, you better run. We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine, you better run.
And remember this time a couple years ago with Kathy Lee Gifford cutting Trump's head off? Now listen, I don't quite know what the left has as far as this obsession with chopping off the heads. And the guillotine association with that is kind of bizarre. Now that song that you hear them play, when they were burning that bear up actually in Portland, that was actually the song that they were playing in the background before they chopped the poor bear's head off. And I've heard it now played in a number of other events and protests, so it just seems to be kind of a bizarre focus on head chopping and guillotines. And, you know, I understand about political theater. Political theater is a good thing. Political theater is oftentimes necessary when you're doing these events or you want to draw attention to something. And good political theater done well can really communicate a message. And that might involve signs and flags and costumes and music and balloons. And, you know, it requires arts and crafts. I mean, you have to put some time into making whatever your political theater activity or event's going to be. Even airplane messages, flying this message, for example, over the Capitol in Olympia, referring to Governor Inslee, saying that he was non-essential, and this was protesting some of the lockdown orders that Inslee had at the time. I was involved in organizing in 2003 a road race in the capital of Olympia called the Run 'Em Out of Government. And you know, I use an image on the T-shirt. I just found this T-shirt here recently, and you know, of the angry mob chasing the politician out of Olympia with money flying out of his pocket, and there's pitchforks in the mob. There's political theater, and there's a time for political theater, and I like political theater. And political theater is free speech, and that's a critical part of who we are as a country. The ability to express ourselves and the freedom to do so, even when we have an opinion that's not popular. And I think that's important. People oftentimes want to protect the free speech of themselves or people they agree with and not those who they disagree with. And the important part of free speech is to protect it for whoever they are. But I think most of us, regardless of whether you are, you know, a liberal or a conservative, you will say that violence and looting is not free speech. I would hope you could. It seems like that's where we could find some common ground. And saying that that is not free speech is just a recognition of reality. If you are using violence and looting to promote your cause or to facilitate whatever message you're trying to get across, that's not free speech. That's just violence and looting. But I don't believe that the government needs to come in and heavily regulate in this area. I'm discouraging people from bringing guillotines, but I don't think they should make a law saying you can't mock up a guillotine. We don't need more laws. It's just something that I think is worth discussing. Just like you see the protesters are frequently burning American flags. That's something they've been doing long before I was born, and it's something that I don't think you need a special law for. I think it's worth pointing out that that's how they like to spend their time and what they like to do. But I think it's crazy to pass laws that would restrict this. I think we have to be very careful about that. Violence and looting is not free speech, but anything that's not hurting people, that's not directly causing violence or directing violence at people, I think should be allowed as part of the political expression and the free expression that people have. Now, guillotines. Why am I specifically calling out guillotines? I'm specifically calling them out because A, they've just been very common lately. You know, we're in a tough and difficult election fight as it is, and having guillotines everywhere are problematic, I think, as an image goes, because it's very similar to things like nooses or gas chambers or something like this. Can anybody imagine a protest that would use nooses or gas chambers as part of their political theater or imagery or mock-ups and not be outraged? There would be lots of outrage about that. And the guillotine fits into that category. And one of the reasons why it fits into that category is that the only way these types of devices would ever be able to hurt somebody is if you actually had captured them, you had them under control, they were kind of your prisoner, or they weren't a threat anymore, and then you're going to use that as some way for the mob or the state to actually kill somebody using those types of devices. That's why I think they're particularly obnoxious and they're ineffective as a way to communicate you're mostly peaceful. If you have those types of devices with you, a peaceful message is not the one you're sending. You're sending a message of violence, and I think that it's not the kind of thing that we really shouldn't have more of that, like we're seeing right now in the streets of Portland and elsewhere. It just seems to be something that shouldn't be done. So if you're mostly peaceful, leave the guillotine at home. We're facing a divided country as it is. It's ridiculously divided right now, and the surveys have really shown there's a substantial polarity between the two different perspectives. And we really I don't think the image of a guillotine being carried around by one group of people is going to convince the other people that that's a good thing. And so I know when I look out and I see a protest like this and I see that they keep bringing guillotines or using that as part of their imagery, it doesn't make me feel better about having them be in charge of anything. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to be joining the people who are using the guillotines. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more, go to wethegovern.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave your comments below. I try to respond to as many of them as possible. And always remember, the future belongs to those who show up.